I hate these kids. Now, not you, relax. Just reading what I wrote on this card a few years ago. At the time, I was teaching at a different school that I'm teaching in right now, a school I mentioned earlier in the week in central Harlem that no longer exists because it was so dysfunctional that the city successfully shut it down. But when it was open, it was the most dangerous middle school in New York City. Out of 1,500 schools, out of 1.1 million students, mine had the highest rate of student injuries per capita. The New York Post called it a hellhole where teachers should get combat pay. It made the news several times for negative incidents. It was one of the most difficult seasons of my life, and my first year teaching there was probably the worst year of my life. Before then, I had worked as a pastor in my home church where I came to Christ and was baptized, and so I was very well loved by very sweet Christian people there. And a thing happens when you're around Christian people a lot. You start to kind of think that you're basically a good person, especially when you're a pastor and you've got all kinds of people saying really sweet and encouraging things to you all the time. You start to kind of think like, I'm basically a good person. And then life turns up the pressure, puts some tension on, shakes you up, and something comes out, and you're like, oh, that was in there. It was so rough at this school that I would cling to anything for a little bit of strength or a little bit of encouragement. I had gone to an inner city school myself growing up, and I had tutored inner city kids, but I'd never really experienced standing in front of a class where kids openly hated me from the go and looked for every opportunity to disrespect me or disrupt education. I'd never been cursed out so many times in my life, and I went to a rough school myself. I'd never known what it felt like to have people throw stuff at you when you're trying to teach. Oh man, it's a humbling sensation. I had never had anyone threaten to rape my wife before. That was a new experience for me. And the ugliness of it, the pressure of it ground me down, that I would just cling to anything I could for a little strength. And so I started writing scripture verses on index cards, and I'd carry them around with me, and I would just cling to them like life preservers in a storm. And this one is Hebrews 12:11. On the other side of this card, it says, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it." And I would just cling to this verse. In the morning, I'd splash some water on my face and look at the zombie staring back at me from the mirror and say, righteousness and peace. Okay, maybe I can go through it for righteousness and peace, and then I'd go into school. Well, at some point, I angrily scrawled on the back of this scripture card, I hate these kids. So what do you do with that? What do you do when life applies the pressure, when you go through some kind of trial and something comes up and you have to admit, oh, maybe I'm not who I like to think that I am. Maybe in the end, as much as I like to think that I love other people more than I love myself and I care about Jesus more than I care about myself, maybe in the end, really, I mostly care about myself. I mostly care about my own comfort. And when things get painful, I don't really like other people or love other people as much as I like to think that I do. And I don't really want to do God's will as much as I really think that I want to do God's will. Not when the chips are down, not when it really costs me something. What do you do with that? Well, if you're going to be serious about following Jesus, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have moments like that, and not just once. Because there are some painful truths about ourselves that Jesus needs for us to understand if we're going to see him and know him clearly. There are going to be times when something comes up and you're going to need to know what to do with that. It definitely happened to Peter. It happened to Peter on the night when Jesus was arrested. Here's what happened. Luke chapter 22, verse 54. Then, seizing Jesus, They led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. So they arrest Jesus. Peter follows along at a distance, probably wanting to see what's going to happen to him. Maybe, if we know anything about Peter by now, hoping for an opportunity to intervene or save him somehow. He's following along at a distance, and they come into the courtyard, and it's night, it's cold. Some people kindle a fire, and they gather around it, and he kind of slips in among the people around this fire. Now, Peter is in enemy-occupied territory right now. I mean, he is around people who, if they find him out, will sell him out. This is a very dangerous situation. If they discover who he really is, that he is with Jesus, well, he's certainly not going to be able to help Jesus. And probably what's going to happen is they're going to grab him, torture him, and kill him as well. Well, after a little while, verse 56, a servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him. Man, imagine how uncomfortable that must have felt to Peter. And said, "This man was with him." You ever had that feeling? You ever told a lie and knew the other person knew that you were lying? That really uncomfortable feeling? Of course, you guys never tell lies, but one time I was trying to sound really smart, and so I quoted this movie to a friend. It's an old movie, so you may not have heard of it. It's called Amadeus. It's about the life of Mozart. And I quoted this movie and tried to pass it off like these were my own thoughts. And my buddy was like, "Yeah, dude, I've seen Amadeus too." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I mean, you've ever had that feeling like you're going to get found out? That feeling of vulnerability, like they know. I mean, this is how Peter must have felt in this moment, like they know. Now, it's one thing to talk a big game when you're with your youth group or at CIY about how you would represent Jesus and how you would stay true to Jesus and what kind of a Christian you would be, but we've all felt this. It changes. The pressure switches when you're the only one there. When you get back to school and you're the only one that cares about Jesus, or you get back with your cousins or the kids in your neighborhood or whatever, and you start to kind of slip. You start to kind of mellow out. Your language gets a little rougher. You kind of downplay your relationship with Jesus. It's everything right now, but then you kind of act like it's not really everything in your life. And that's exactly what Peter does. He gets in a full-out defensive mode. Verse 57, he denies it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter said. So he's in full-out defensive mode now. And about an hour later, verse 59, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Jesus was from a small town called Galilee. Peter was too. It's probably an accent, sounded similar. And he's like, they're from the same hometown, this town in the sticks. He has to be one of them. And Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And then it happens. Verse 60, just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Flashback. Earlier that evening when Jesus was having his final meal with his disciples, it's the last time for him to get together with his brothers and share a meal together before he's going to suffer and die. At some point during the meal, he pulls Peter aside for a little heart-to-heart, and it went like this. Back in verse 31, "Simon, Simon." Now wait just a second. Didn't he get a new name? But in this moment, he's Simon again. "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, to sift you, to sort you out, to shake you up, see what's good and what's bad. The adversary, the accuser, has asked to come and turn it up, put up the pressure, tempt you, try you, find out what's really going on inside there." Verse 32, "But I," Jesus says, "I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, but you will strengthen your brothers. And Peter's thinking, when I've turned back, no way, no how. I'm with you, Jesus. And he replies, verse 33, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me. Fast forward to that night. Jesus is praying in the garden. The soldiers, they come and they arrest him. They take him away. Peter follows along at a distance, maybe wanting to see what's going to happen, probably hoping to help somehow. He comes into the courtyard. They start a fire. He's warming himself around the fire with the people who are gathered there. And at some point, a servant girl says to Peter, wait, you were one of the men who was with Jesus, right? And Peter says, no. And then a little bit later, another one says, weren't you one of the ones that was with Jesus? And he says, no, I don't know the guy. And a little bit later, somebody else says, wait, you're a Galilean. You must be one of the ones that was with Jesus. And he says, I swear I do not know this man. And just at that moment, verse 60, just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and he wept bitterly. This one time when I was a kid, there's this other kid who was like really griping about his mom. I guess his mom was really not a good mom. And he was saying all these awful things about her. And I kind of joined in. And I said something bad about my mom, and instantly my heart just sunk. Because my mom is a really good mom, and instantly I just knew that that was wrong. And now, decades later, I'm a full-grown man, I clearly remember that moment when I knew. This other time when I was in kindergarten, go even further back, I found a little roll of quarters taped together on a shelf in the back of the room, and I took them. It was probably some kid's lunch money or milk money, and I knew it was wrong, and I knew I shouldn't do it, and I did it anyway. My dad found out. We had to go back up to the school and return it, but I knew, and you might hear it and be like, whatever, it's less than $2 or whatever, but I knew. Also in kindergarten, I had the 24 pack of crayons, and there was this kid that had the 128 pack of crayons with key lime through fuchsia, whatever, all that stuff. And I was jealous. But we didn't have a lot of money. So I knew the answer if I just went home and said, Mom, can I have a cooler pack of crayons? It would be, no, we can't do that right now, honey. So I lied. I came home and I told my mom that kids were making fun of me because of how dinky my pack of crayons were. Now, that sounds ridiculous to us now. We're like, ha, it's funny, a kindergartner. It's funny, but here's the thing. I knew. And she bought me the crayons, and I couldn't enjoy them. I hated those crayons. You have a memory like that? Or maybe you couldn't even share it with somebody else because you know they wouldn't take it seriously. They'd be like, whatever, that's not a big deal. God forgives you, whatever. But you know. And when you think back, you almost cringe, like physically cringe. When I think back to taking those quarters, I almost physically cringe when I remember that moment, because it was a moment where I knew what was right, I knew what was wrong, I knew I was choosing what was wrong, and I chose what was wrong. I knew. So, what do you do with that? What do you do with the failure? What do you do when you realize you have a dark side? Well, I can tell you what most people do. Most people stuff it back down. Most people stuff it because it's way too painful to admit it. It taps into core things about how we feel about ourselves. We all want to feel like we're good people. And mostly we want to feel like we're good people because we're scared, we're terrified. If I admit that I'm not a good person, or that I really chose to do something wrong and I chose to do it and nobody else made me do it and I can't rationalize it, that was me that did that thing, well then, Am I lovable? Can I be accepted? Am I important? Am I valuable? Will I have a purpose? And there's so many messages our whole life. Some of us from our very own parents. Some of us, God forbid, but some of us from our own churches. That you are not. If you admit that, if you bring it up, you're not lovable, you're not valuable, you're not important, you don't have a purpose. And so we got to stuff it because it hurts too much to bring that up. And so most people stuff it. And here's how you stuff it. You just kind of put it away when those moments come, a memory from your past, or you go through some kind of trial and something comes up that you are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was there. I forgot that I was like that. You kind of go, well, nobody's perfect. I mean, everybody does bad things, and God forgives, and you kind of stuff it back down. And if that doesn't work, then you kind of shift the focus to but I do a lot of good things, right? I mean, I do this and I do that, and all those good things kind of counterbalance the bad things. And if that doesn't work, then you compare yourself to other people, and you say, well, I'm not as bad as that guy. And, I don't do the things that she does, and you just stuff it down. The problem with that is it keeps you from Jesus. And this very thing keeps a lot of people from Jesus. It is keeping some of you in this room right now from Jesus. Because when you come to Jesus, you come to the one man in history who was pure through and through. No matter how much the pressure got turned up, no matter the risk, no matter what was at stake, no matter the pain, no matter the loss, no matter the shame, Jesus stayed true, through and through. And so when you come to Jesus, it's like you come to a spotlight on your soul. And he's the one guy that stayed true through and through, and he sees right through us. The text said that he looked straight at Peter. And he sees right through me. And he sees right through you. And so most people stuff it, and it keeps them from coming to Jesus, and it's one of the great tragedies of life. Because Jesus is for us, not against us. Jesus is saying, the devil has asked permission to sift you. The devil wants to shake you up, put the pressure down, turn up the tension, turn up the heat. It's the devil that wants to shake you up and see what's in there and accuse you and find your faults and find the chinks in your armor. But me, Jesus, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you that your faith will hold and that when you've turned back, you'll even strengthen your brothers and sisters. What an incredible thought. Jesus is praying for you. And maybe you didn't grow up in a Christian home or you didn't have parents that prayed for you. You can stop worrying about that from here on out because Jesus is praying for you. This thing with Jesus, it's as real as it gets. There can be no pretending, there can be no faking, there can be no image management or putting on a pretty smile, even though that's what a lot of people do, and their whole church is dedicated to this project, this religious project of faking it. But if you want to follow after the real Jesus, you've got to be real. If you want to follow after the true Jesus, you've got to be true. So what do you do when the real stuff comes out? What do you do when you fail? My son, Rowan, my 3-year-old, he hasn't learned how to lie yet. I don't know why, and I'm not complaining, but he just hasn't figured it out yet, that he can make up a false reality and then pretend like it's true and try to convince somebody else that it's true. So when he does something bad, and he's a really sweet kid, but everybody does bad things, when he hits his little brother or draws on the wall or whatever, he just tells me. Even though he might face a consequence, he might get a timeout, which he hates, he still tells me. I'll hear his little brother Leo crying in the other room, and I don't even have to go find him. Rowan runs to me, and he says, Dada, I didn't want Leo to have Lightning McQueen, so I hit him. Even though he knows that he's going to get in trouble, he just comes and tells me. And I don't know when he's going to figure out that he can lie to me. He will at some point. But right now, it's such a beautiful thing. He runs to me, and I can help make him right. And we go back there, and I put Rowan and Leo together, and I'm like, okay, give your brother a kiss. And it's the most awkward, like grab his ears and like kiss the top of his forehead. Give him a hug, best friend brothers, everything's right now. Now Leo's smiling again, and I'm able to make it right because he invited me in. If only I could be more like my son. Oh, that we would all be more like my 3-year-old son. But instead, we're all hiding. From the first 2 of us in the garden, Adam and Eve, they broke the one rule in paradise, and God came looking for them in the garden, and then they did something that no human being had ever done before in the history of humans. They hid. And we have been hiding ever since. But Jesus, our Lord, said, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a little child. So today, I'd like to challenge you to be brave, to be vulnerable. Could you open up a little bit to each other? And if you're not ready for that, at least to Him? Because we want you to see and know the real Jesus. Do you want to see and know the real Jesus? Well, if you want to see and know the real Jesus, then you have to be the real you.